All right, let's take a trip back in time. But we're not going to focus on the usual stuff, the kings, the queens, the big epic battles. And look, that stuff is cool, for sure. But it just wasn't the reality for like 90% of the people living back then. So today, we're going to look at the lives of the regular folks, the ones who actually made the medieval world go round. To really get it, we're going to spend a whole day in a typical medieval village. We're going to see what life was actually like from the moment the sun came up to the moment it went down. Okay, so first things first, what did one of these villages even look like? Well, the whole layout, everything about it, was designed for basically two things: survival and farming. And what's kind of wild is just how practical everything was. You see how the houses are all clustered together? That was for security. The two biggest, most important buildings, always the church and the manor house. Pretty clear who was in charge, right? And everything else, those huge open fields, the nearby woods, the common land where animals could graze, it was all there for one reason: to grow food. So you've got the village, but what about your actual house? Let's step inside and see how a family really lived. And I'm telling you, it is nothing like the homes we have today. Most people lived in these small huts called crook cottages, and they get that name from these big, curved wooden beams, the crooks, that made up the main frame. But the walls? What were they made of? They used this method called wattle and daub, and it's actually pretty simple when you break it down. First, you'd weave a bunch of sticks together into a lattice, kind of like a big, flat basket. That's the wattle. Then you just smear this sticky mix of mud, clay, and straw all over it to fill in the cracks. That's the daub. Super cheap, pretty effective, but yeah, definitely not waterproof. Just take a look inside. First thing you'll notice? No bedrooms. The entire family, parents, kids, maybe even grandparents, they all lived, ate, and slept right here in one single room. And that fire? It's just a pit in the middle of the dirt floor, which means the whole place was constantly filled with smoke. Oh, and to make it even cozier in the winter, you'd probably bring your animals inside with you so they wouldn't freeze to death. Your whole life was basically ruled by the sun. Seriously. As soon as it was light out, the church bells would ring, and that was your alarm clock. Time to work. Men were usually out in the big fields, women took care of the garden, looked after the animals, and were constantly spinning wool or weaving cloth. And the kids? They were expected to start doing chores pretty much as soon as they could walk. Your workday only ended when it got too dark to see. But here's the thing, you weren't just working for yourself. A peasant's life was really controlled by two huge forces: the local lord, who owned all the land, and the church, which was incredibly powerful. And believe me, both of them wanted a lot from you. So you were kind of caught in the middle. For the lord of the manor, you had to work his private fields for free several days a week. You had to give him a chunk of whatever you grew. You even had to pay him a fee just to use his mill to grind your grain into flour. Then there was the church. You had to go to services every Sunday, follow all its teachings, and of course, pay a special tax. It was just a life of constant duties. And that special tax for the church, it had a name: the tithe. A tithe was 10%. It meant you had to give 1/10 of everything you produced, every bit of grain, every vegetable, every animal, to the local church. Now imagine you're a family just barely getting by. Giving up 10% of your food, that was a huge, huge deal. But the church's power wasn't just spiritual. It was also the center for all information. Think about it. In a world where almost nobody could read or write, the local priest was often one of the only people who could. That made him the gatekeeper to pretty much all knowledge, whether it was an official announcement from the Lord or the stories from the Bible. So all this work, all these obligations, it was really all about one thing: staying alive. So let's talk about the basics. How did they actually get enough food to eat? And what happened when someone got sick? Well, for farming, they had this really clever system, actually. It was called the three-field system. See, instead of planting on all their land every single year and just wearing out the soil, they divided their land into three huge fields. Each year, they'd plant one with a crop like wheat, the second with something like oats or barley, and they'd leave the third one completely empty or fallow to let it rest and get its nutrients back. Then the next year, they'd rotate everything. It was a game changer for growing more food. Okay, so they're growing all this grain. What are they actually eating? Well, the number one meal, day in and day out, was something called pottage. It was basically a thick vegetable stew that was always bubbling away over the fire. You just throw in whatever you had: beans, peas, onions from the garden. It was super basic, probably not very exciting, but it was hot and it was filling. So what else is on the menu? Well, you'd have a lot of dark, heavy bread made from rye. To drink, you're having ale or maybe cider. And that's because drinking water straight from the river was a really good way to get sick. Meat, that was a massive luxury, something you'd maybe get on a big feast day. And if you had a sweet tooth, your only option was honey. And this is where things get really tough. With no concept of germs, no real medicine to speak of, health was just incredibly fragile. People thought you got sick from things like bad air or because you were being punished by God. A simple cut could get infected and become deadly. And tragically, a huge number of children just didn't make it past their 5th birthday. It was a harsh reality. But it wasn't all just doom and gloom. I mean, life wasn't only about hard work and survival. People still found ways to connect with each other, to have fun, and to share what they knew. So, what did they do when they weren't working in the fields? Well, for starters, think about your closet right now. How many outfits do you have? Now imagine having just 2 for your entire life. That was the reality for most people. Your clothes were made from rough wool that the women in your family spun and sewed by hand. They were built for one purpose: to be warm and last forever. Fashion wasn't even a thought. You wore them until they literally fell to pieces. But even with such a tough life, people absolutely knew how to have fun. The big breaks from work came on holy days, which is where we get our word holidays. On these days, the entire village would come together to celebrate. There'd be wrestling matches, archery contests, lots of singing and dancing. It was their chance to blow off steam, and it was so important for keeping the community's spirits up. So what about school? Well, it didn't really exist for most people. Education was 100% practical, on-the-job training. Boys learned how to be farmers by working alongside their dads in the fields. Girls learned how to cook, spin, and run a home by helping their moms. All the important stuff, the history of their people, the rules of society, it was all passed down through stories and songs, usually told around the fire at night. And there you have it, a day in the life. It was, without a doubt, a world of incredible hardship, totally ruled by the seasons and nonstop work. But it was also a world built on really tight-knit communities, where everyone relied on each other. A world where people found joy in the simplest things. It kind of makes you think, about how much has changed since then, and maybe what hasn't.